few big-name candidates lead a field of lesser-knowns in the short campaign sprint to the mayor's office. Does San Diego need lobbyists to protect its civic and business interests in Sacramento and Washington? If so, where are they? Plus, CBS and Time Warner cut a deal in the rapidly changing media realm. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome. It's Friday, September 6th. I'm Mark Sauer. Joining me at the Roundtable today are KPBS Metro reporter Sandhya Dirks, reporter Dean Calbreth of the San Diego Daily Transcript, and TV writer Robert P. Lawrence. 2 weeks after Bob Filner's dramatic farewell before a packed council chamber, the field of candidates to replace him for mayor has taken form. Leading the way are two moderates, Republican Kevin Faulconer and newly minted Democrat Nathan Fletcher. Councilman David Alvarez, a progressive Democrat, jumped in this week as well. Also at the gate are about 20 other political unknowns, and one man known all too well to most San Diegans, former city attorney Mike Aguirre. Sandhya, let's start with the two moderates from opposite parties, Mr. Faulconer and Mr. Fletcher. It seems you made the wonderful comment this week about initials here.
Yes, there's something about the letter F and the mayoralship in San Diego. But you know, what's interesting about these two, there's a little bit more known about Faulconer's record in terms of he's been on city council for a long time. So we have a sense of where he is, and he's very much in the middle. He's not really on social issues at all, sort of falling into typical Republican party stances, but definitely he's a fiscal conservative, very friendly to the business community. They have given him their endorsement, and he's definitely a centrist Republican, a kind of a figure we're used to seeing in San Diego.
And Nathan Fletcher,
politics.
a little different journey to his starting gate here.
Nathan Fletcher definitely has been just about everything in the past year. He's been a Republican, he's been an independent, and now he's running as a Democrat. But we don't really necessarily know that much about what that means. We haven't seen his plank in terms of what that transition means. And right now, my big question is, between Fletcher and Faulconer, what's the difference? What is actually distinguishing these two very centrist candidates?
Well, let's focus on Fletcher for a moment. Why did he leave the Republican Party? And he got some national press at the time in the midst of last year's mayoral campaign.
Well, I did talk to him. I talked to him last week, and one of the things that he told me was that he just realized more and more that his point of view and his priorities were not lying with where the Republicans were. For example, he said, "Look, I support Obamacare. I support, money for public education." So he found himself, he says, realizing that he was just more in line with Democratic interests. But it's still something where we are going to have to pin him down on what that actually means in terms of a platform.
Bob, go ahead.
This morning's Union Tribune had a story about reviving the issue of the Charger Stadium. Right. Is that going to be an issue in this mayoral campaign?
It is, I think, every mayoral campaign, a huge issue. It always comes up. And it absolutely is an issue because that is a huge, major project. And it's a project which has some echoes in projects of the past, which have gotten San Diego in trouble, including what happened when the baseball stadium went downtown. So I think definitely it's going to be something watched by both the business community and by the progressive community who, feel that Filner was their guy who was going to stand up to big business interests.
He was going to referee that.
He was going to referee that. Now that we no longer have him, what are our options and what are the politicians that we do have going to say about another big downtown project like that?
Right. Now, a big name, of course, that has dropped out and announced this week he wasn't running is Carl DeMaio. Of course, ran and narrowly lost to Bob Filner in last year's general election. And DeMaio is going to go for Congress. He's got about $500 million, $500 million raised so far, I think. That's in the ballpark.
Actually, $500,000.
Oh, I'm way ahead of it. The campaign hasn't gotten that big yet into the billions. $500,000. Thank you for correcting me.
Unless you were planning on making a donation.
But you did a story on that. Tell us a little bit about what was the money problem there? Could he have taken that $500,000 and used it?
He wouldn't have been able to take it all because the federal rules are more lenient in terms of the amount of money that you can take in than city rules are. So he would have had to give up about $150,000 of that. And one of the things that's come out, in terms of how he made his decision to drop out of the race, a lot of the people who had given him the federal max of $5,200 or so would have been limited to only a $1,000 contribution in the mayoral race, but also they had already made that investment in his congressional campaign. And apparently during the last weekend, a lot of them were talking to him about, we want you to stay in the congressional campaign. We've made this commitment. We'd be behind if you suddenly jump out of it. So we want you to stay there.
Yeah, and the national folks, who helped him raise that $500,000 so far, were pretty keen on him opposing the Democrat Scott Peters up there for Congress. Bob?
And is Micah Geary in or out?
Well, that's an interesting question. What have we learned on that, Sandhya?
He has pulled papers, which means he is in the process of potentially saying that he's in, but he hasn't officially, as of yet, said that he is, in fact, going to be running. Now, it'll be interesting if he is. He's definitely a huge character in San Diego politics. And I think it's worth noting that, our last mayoral election, only a year ago, we had these two very polarizing forces and these two very partisan forces in terms of Bob Filner and Carl DeMaio, both on very different sides of the political aisle. In this election, our two frontrunners are much closer together. Right. So who ends up sort of entering the race? In this case, it looks like we might have some other Democrats from parts of the spectrum entering the race, and what that will do to Fletcher and where that will push him on the spectrum.
Yeah,
and does Geary stand a chance, you think, or is he too big already?
Well, he didn't fare
too big for his own good.
Well, he didn't fare all that well in his last run, and when he lost to Goldsmith for city attorney. So you wonder if he can get back off the mat. But you made the point on the moderates. Let's talk about David Alvarez for a minute. Here's a progressive Democrat. The folks south of 8 here who lost a champion in Bob Filner here and feel just at a great loss at this point. Would Alvarez come out as a progressive, at least maybe force Fletcher to run more to the left as we go?
Well, that seems to be what Alvarez has suggested about why he got involved in the race. He said that he wouldn't run if, for example, the current serving mayor, Todd Gloria, decided to step in. But he sort of said in the lack of that, in the lack of somebody who was a little bit more to the left, he felt that he wanted to get in the race and represent those people south of 8. Obviously, we have a demographic shift in San Diego, which changes the political spectrum a little bit. And, Alvarez he's a very young candidate. He's only, I think, if I understand this correctly, been on city council 1 term.
Not even a full term.
Not even a full term. So he's, again, a little bit of an unknown. Right. We're dealing with a lot of very young candidates who still haven't necessarily made clear what their priorities are, what they're all about. So how this will, we don't have a lot of time to figure this out.
No, it's a short run.
So it seems like Fletcher is already trying to address that. He gained on the day that Alvarez announced, Fletcher was bringing out half a dozen Hispanic leaders in the Hispanic community, leaders among Democrats, and also a labor leader in terms of Lorena Gonzalez, who endorsed him.
To head him off at the pass a little bit.
To head him off at the pass. And to blunt, this has been going on a while, that the liberal Democrats have been trying to draft somebody to run against Fletcher because they just perceive him as being too moderate. And I think that as that was going on, you could see him trying to reach out more and more to liberal Democrats.
And what's funny is that this narrative of neighborhoods, which was so sort of lauded by Filner, it's something that everyone's picking up on, not just Fletcher, who's been talking a lot about neighborhoods and taking the interest out of the downtown development and putting it back into the entirety of the community, but also Faulkner. Faulkner has, so, it'd be interesting to see how the sort of some of the progressive seeds that were at least planted in the rhetoric by Filner are going to play out in this very short campaign.
But did Filner poison the well in terms of liberals and progressives getting the favor of the voters?
It's a fascinating question, and one that I've been asking a lot in my own reporting, whether or not Filner's sort of behavior was a body blow for progressive politics.
Right.
But the demographics are changing, and I don't know if one person can necessarily take down what seems to be an increasingly democratic city.
All right, it's a short campaign, and we're going to hear a lot more and a lot of intense coverage as we move forward here between now and November 19th a special election day. Let's shift gears now. San Diego should be a pretty easy sell. Imagine, for example, being a lobbyist for the city of Detroit at the moment. But we haven't had lobbyists looking out for our interests in Sacramento or Washington since the first of this year. And it's not that we hire lobbyists to promote San Diego as much as it is for them to flag potential legislation, regulations that could affect our city's interests. Interim Mayor Todd Gloria said hiring lobbyists is among his top priorities in moving forward from the Bob Filner days. So, Dean, let's start with the basics. What do lobbyists do for the city? How many do we have, and why do we hire them?
Well, the city currently doesn't have any lobbyists because Bob Filner cut off their contracts last January. We had lobbyists. Last year we spent about $350,000 on our lobbyists, both in Washington and Sacramento. And among other things, they flag grants and funds that are available from the federal or state government. They have an impact or can have an impact on legislation that might be perceived to affect us. One of the reasons that Filner ended their contracts is that previously our lobbyists allegedly hadn't really been reporting exactly what they were doing or exactly what their priorities were. And this was a complaint, especially among Democrats on the city council.
So it was a transparency issue then?
It was a transparency issue. People like David Alvarez, among others, wanted to know, how is our money being spent? How much time are you spending on this priority versus that priority? And apparently they weren't getting the answers right. Yeah. But even David Alvarez and his fellow Democrats on the council wanted lobbyists. They just didn't want those lobbyists. And Filner failed over the past 9 months to reappoint somebody else who could have been more to their liking.
So we've had nobody on that watch in the meantime.
How unusual is it for a major American city to not have lobbyists in D.C.?
Yeah, very, very unusual, especially a city of our size. And even smaller cities, you got Carlsbad and not Chula Vista, but Oceanside and other cities that have lobbyists in Sacramento. Which is very important to San Diego, to have a voice up there on coastal regulations, on building regulations. They want their impact to be felt in Sacramento. The county spends $1 million on lobbyists in both Washington and Sacramento.
What do the lobbyists do for the city or the county that the congressional delegation doesn't do?
The congressional delegation has its own priorities and everything, and they're drafting legislation. And among other things, the lobbyists for the county help them draft that legislation, help them craft laws that might benefit San Diego. So that's one thing. Another thing is that that these lobbyists concentrate on people who are not from the county to support the county. In Washington, one of the top priorities is on the border relations, and we want to draw people from Oklahoma or from Wisconsin to support the border and to understand the border. And that becomes the duty of the lobbyists or one of the functions of the lobbyists that maybe our Congress people don't have enough time to do.
Now, a city this size, how do you figure out how much we should be spending on lobbyists? Why can't city staffers do this? Just make this a couple, 3-4 folks' job in the city, have them travel back and forth and work right out of City Hall.
Well, you could do that, and some major San Diego entities do that. The San Diego Unified School District has its own lobbyists up in Sacramento to represent its cause.
Not an outside firm, yeah.
Yeah, and so you can do that. But there are so many bills coming through Sacramento. There is something like, I think it was 7,000 bills last year, 2,000 bills so far this year that may or may not affect the county, that the county wants a voice on. And so it has lobbyists there to review those bills. How would this affect us? If it affects us in a major way, we want a voice on that. So that requires a full-time staff rather than just one person.
Now, it seems to me it's very difficult to figure out how good a job these folks are doing. If you hire them, how much should you be spending on it? Are there notable failures they've had, or what's their successes? How do you determine all that?
Well, the county, again, which seems to have a pretty good management of its lobbyists, has some criteria about, are you able to get us to the table on important issues? Have you had an impact on how legislation has been written? Have you made us aware of grants and other funds that we could come across? And it judges its lobbyists on those three criteria. It sets priorities for them, which I'm not sure that we had previously done in City Hall.
In the city. So has the county been more successful by some objective yardstick than the city has in terms of looking out for the interests?
It's probably hard to come up with an objective yardstick, but they appear to have had more of an impact. They have gotten, they can directly say this grant came with the help of this lobbyist, and the grants that they have added up from the state are worth much more than the lobbyists that they've got up there.
So you can measure it that way.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Sandia, in the middle here where we've got this interim period of at least a couple of months, probably several months here if we have a runoff election, of a councilman, Todd Gloria, and his perspective as the actual mayor right now. And in an issue like lobbyists, where he's put this front and center, he's put the RFP out, and we're going to be getting bids and getting these folks back in place. It seems to me maybe the councilman's view versus Filner's view would be that transparency is number one in judging the job these folks do.
Well, one of the things that Gloria has said, and one of the reasons he said that he wasn't actually going to run, for mayor, was that there was a real mess in the mayor's office. And this wasn't necessarily something completely new. I think Marty Emerald told KPBS that, yes, there was a big mess that was left by inefficiencies during the Filner administration. But Walt Eckerd, when he came in to help run the city, he also said, "Look, these are sort of structural problems in the way the executive branch has been sort of structured for years, dating back years." And I think as somebody who comes from city council, who's felt the real tension and lack of transparency and communication between the mayor's office, between what's happening up there and what's happening with the rest of the council, Gloria really does want to sort of open this up. He also has the relationship is that his colleagues are people that he's used to being equals with. So I think that he has said he wants to work with council and he wants to work together to get the mayor's office as a place that is open and transparent again, not just after the Filner administration, but after problems that, by Walt Eckerd's own saying, have been there structurally for a long time now.
Up some of those issues.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to move on now. A bitter dispute between corporate media and corporate media giant CBS TV and Time Warner Cable meant millions of viewers in several major markets were denied access to CBS and Showtime programs for a month. The fight was over money, no surprise there, and this deal that was struck this week was seen by many analysts as a big win for CBS, a modest win for Time Warner, and a big loss for subscribers. Bob, the long nightmare for the folks who wanted to see the U.S. Open and Dexter and some of these favorite shows, that's over with, but what was this dust-up all about?
Well, last night I was reading about the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. And I was very grateful that the people in the White House at that time were not Time Warner executives. And when this thing came along, it was by some miracle it was settled just before the NFL season started.
A miracle, a coincidence.
A miracle coincidence, exactly. What it was about was that CBS wanted more money and Time Warner didn't want to pay. And instead of $1 per subscriber a month, CBS wanted to start raising that to where it would reach $2.
They don't go up a nickel at a time, huh? They go right from 1 to 2.
Exactly. And so what Time Warner did was it pulled CBS stations off its system. Particularly, it was CBS-owned stations. That is, those are owned and operated by the network itself, and which did not include the San Diego's KFMB. So they were left out of this whole thing. Okay.
But right up to the north, L.A.
Los Angeles, Dallas, New York, Boston.
Millions of folks across the country.
Yeah, exactly. Really big major cities were losing. And so CBS took the offensive and took out billboards and ads and all kinds of things saying that Time Warner was taking your favorite programs off the air, and you can blame Time Warner with not leaving out the fact that the reason Time Warner did that was because CBS wanted more money. And David Letterman was on the offensive on his late night shows on CBS, and he was referring to Time Warner executives as thugs and goons and hoodlums.
Don't sugarcoat it, David.
And but it all got settled just in time for the NFL season and for the fall TV season. It was the thing was begun in August, the deadest time of the year in terms of television viewerships, because people are outside, not at home watching television.
Reruns are on, and
it's nothing but reruns, and people are not paying attention, and the only football games are on are the games that don't count anyway.
Right, the exhibitions.
And it ended up with CBS winning and Time Warner caving in eventually.
And what happens to the subscribers? We're going to pay more in the long run, and this isn't probably the last such fight, right?
No. These things will keep happening, absolutely, and the prices for cable will keep going up. There is a solution. And it's being advertised on television right now. It costs $19.95, and with that, you can watch TV for free forever. Okay. It's called an antenna.
Antenna, okay, well, novel concept.
And I just last night I saw a commercial for it. Miracle product. You can watch all the CBS or ABC or whatever. The only thing you're not going to watch is cable programs.
Yeah. Well, Springsteen says there's 57 channels and nothing on.
And that was several years ago, and now there's 500 channels and possibly nothing on.
Right.
And
so where are the folks looking out for us? Where are the regulators in all this who are supposed to be the champion of us little guys?
Well, remember Ronald Reagan? Deregulation. Okay. And basically what happened was that in 1992, the Cable Act was enacted, which allowed local stations to charge for their signal to be run on cable. Before that, the cable systems picked up the signal from the local stations and put it on, and they were making money from the product that the local stations were putting out, that is the content. After 1992, the local stations were able to charge money for the cable to be able to do that. From their point of view, you can understand that. Why should we be, letting them carry our product that we pay money to produce, and they pick it up for free? Why do we let them do that? The opposite argument is, well, it's already free. It's out over the air.
Right.
And
the publicly owned airwaves.
The publicly owned airwaves.
Right.
So the way it turns out is that they have to pay for it, if they want it. And if they don't want to pay for it, they don't get it. And from the standpoint of the public, if push had really, really come to shove over this battle that happened last month, what could have happened, what might have happened, is that people in those cities would go out and buy the 1995 antenna and watch CBS for free. Cable would not like that, because then people would realize, hey, we don't have to pay for cable.
Right.
If we're willing to live without CNN and AMC and Turner Classic Movies, and if we're willing to live without ESPN, we can watch football for free on our local CBS station.
Maybe not all the football, but plenty of football.
Enough football for any living human being.
Now let's talk. That brings up an issue of bundling here, where you get all, as you're saying, you get all of these various things within some sort of fee, and then you get more if you pay more. And you bundle more. Why can't I simply go on and say, I'm willing to pay for these 6 programs? I think I saw a survey here in researching this story that the average person never looks at more than 17 channels through the course of
I'd be surprised if it's that many.
That many, right.
Yeah, right.
So why can't we just pick them off a la carte, I think is the word we're looking for?
Because the cable companies won't do it. As simple as that.
It seems kind of like a fight among dinosaurs, because
the
cable stations, cable networks are going to be overtaken by the internet. Where you can pick out those 17 stations.
Well, but the thing is, they own that too.
And that was what I was going to ask, is that it's so interesting talking about the regulation between content and who's providing the content and who's paying for it, even though the content is originally free. Seems to me very, very relevant in an internet age where we're talking about content and media. But what about people who watch football on the internet? What about people who, I know I watch most of my TV on my computer. Is that something that's threatening the bottom line?
Well, but they still own the content. and so one way or another, somebody's paying for it.
But
And what this battle showed in the end, content won, because showed the cable company needed the content more than CBS needed the cable company.
Right.
Yeah.
So they got the upper hand in that.
Yeah. And the other thing is that the content providers, that is the networks, the producers, they own all kinds of things that you wouldn't expect. For example, Jeopardy and what's the other show on
Wheel of Fortune?
Wheel of Fortune. Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune. In San Diego, they run on an NBC station. Right. They're owned by CBS.
Wow.
See, and so these kinds of interlocking things, go on all the time, and it gets very complicated. But in the end, content wins.
Well, in the short time we have left, let me ask if this has anything at all to do with this long-running problem for Padre fans trying to watch the games here on Time Warner.
It's the same battle in a microcosm.
Okay.
It's a very small version of the same battle. That is, Time Warner will not pay for the baseball games what Cox is paying for them, and what the other like the satellite services are paying. Time Warner doesn't want to pay that, and so Time Warner subscribers don't get the Padres games, for which I can only say count your blessings.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that good news or bad news this year? There are 22 games out of first.
And no, they don't get the games, and this hurts both sides. It's really an issue of cutting off the nose to spite their face.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it there. Thanks very much. That wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Sandhya Dirks of KPBS News, Dean Calberth of the San Diego Daily Transcript, and TV writer Robert P. Lawrence. Reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available at our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer, Senior News Editor at KPBS. Thanks for joining us today at the Roundtable.